There are moments in life when everything around you demands a response. The pressure is loud, the conflict is real, the temptation to speak up, to fight back, to defend yourself feels overwhelming. You want to prove your point. You want to be heard, but something deep in your spirit whispers, "Be still," and in that moment you come face to face with a divine truth that few are willing to embrace. Your strength is not in your voice, but in your surrender. Your power is not in how loud you shout, but in how quiet you trust. The world tells you to hustle, to argue, to make your name known, but heaven says, focus on God, humble yourself, and stay silent, because silence in the Spirit is not defeat. It is authority under control. It is the battlefield where you let God fight for you. Some of the greatest victories are won not by speaking, but by standing, not by reacting, but by resting, and not by striving, but by surrendering. This is a different kind of strength, a holy kind, a focused, humble, quiet strength that moves heaven. And that, right there, is where breakthrough begins. There comes a point in life when everything around you begins to feel like noise. The voices of people, the pressure of decisions, the demands of your emotions, they all come together in a storm of confusion. In those moments, the natural reaction is to scramble for answers, to find clarity in human reasoning, or to reach out to someone who can explain what's going on. But clarity doesn't come from the noise of the world. It comes when you learn to shut out the voices and set your full focus on God. The mind that is scattered in 100 directions will always be anxious, but the mind that is fixed on God will be kept in perfect peace. Focusing on God is not about staring into the sky or reciting religious words. It's about deliberately turning the eyes of your heart toward Him. It's about laying aside every distraction, every burden, and every opinion, and saying within yourself, God, you are my source, my help, and my direction. When you do that, something begins to shift inside. The fog of confusion begins to lift. The things that seemed so overwhelming start to lose their power because your spirit starts tuning in to a higher frequency, the frequency of heaven. The devil is the master of distraction. He doesn't have to destroy you. He just has to divide your attention. He'll stir up offenses, provoke unnecessary conversations, and tempt you to overthink until your heart is so weighed down that you can't hear the voice of the Spirit. But the moment you take your eyes off the confusion and lock them on God, you step into a place of clarity and authority. This is why the Word says to be still and know that He is God. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is faith in action. When you focus on God, you silence every voice that tries to define your outcome. You tell the enemy, you don't get my attention. My eyes are on the Lord. The truth is, your mind can't hold two focuses at once. You're either focusing on the problem or on the one who solves it. You're either meditating on what people said or what God said. You can't feed your spirit and feed your fear at the same time. That's why focus is warfare. That's why the enemy works overtime to scatter your mind. But the person who wins is the one who refuses to be pulled in every direction. The person who chooses to meditate day and night on God's truth, to set their affections on things above, to seek the face of God with sincerity and quietness of spirit, is the one who walks in peace no matter what storm is blowing. Focus is the difference between sinking and walking on water. When Peter looked at the waves, he sank. But when he looked at Jesus, he walked. That is the power of a focused heart. It sees God in the middle of the chaos and moves forward without fear. Humility is not just an outward attitude. It is the inward position of the heart that determines how heaven responds to you. The proud heart says, I've got this figured out, while the humble heart says, Lord, I need you more than anything else. Many people chase after God's blessings, favor, and promotion, but they overlook the key that opens all of it, humility. God doesn't respond to arrogance, self-reliance, or spiritual pride. In fact, Scripture tells us that he resists the proud. Resistance from God is not something anyone wants. It means your prayers bounce back, your plans hit walls, and your strength gets drained. But when a man or woman humbles themselves before God, it draws a different response. Grace begins to flow. Doors begin to open. Wisdom begins to rise. Favor begins to follow. That's because humility makes room for God to take control. And when God is in control, nothing can stand against you. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It doesn't demand attention, doesn't seek to be right all the time, and doesn't compete for recognition. It's content with being unseen if it means God gets the glory. A humble person doesn't need a spotlight. Their confidence is not in their title, their gift, or their reputation. Their confidence is in the presence of God. That's why God can trust them with more. They won't misuse his blessings to exalt themselves. They'll use everything he gives them to lift his name higher. You see, God wants to elevate his people, but he won't lift someone up who refuses to bow down. The way up in the kingdom is always down. When you humble yourself under God's mighty hand, he will lift you up in due time. Some people wonder why their prayers seem powerless. They pray loud, they speak in faith, but the heavens seem shut. Often, it's not the words of the prayer, it's the posture of the heart. A proud heart cannot carry the weight of answered prayer, but a humble heart is like good soil, ready to receive, ready to grow, ready to bear fruit. The Lord draws near to the humble. He defends them. He teaches them. He lifts them. You don't have to prove yourself when you're walking in humility. God will prove himself through you. You don't have to chase after opportunities. God will bring the right ones to you. Humility trusts God's timing. It doesn't rush to the front. It waits in the back until God says, "Now is your time." Pride wants the platform. Humility wants the altar. Pride demands a voice. Humility seeks a whisper from heaven, and that's where the power is, not in shouting your plans, but in submitting them. The humble are not shaken by delays, not bitter in trials, not defensive in conflict. They rest, knowing that God is their defender and rewarder. That kind of heart attracts heaven's attention because God delights in those who lay everything down to lift him up. There is a kind of strength that doesn't come from loud declarations or bold arguments, but from quiet surrender. Silence in the presence of pressure, pain, or provocation is not weakness. It is wisdom. There are times when staying silent is the most spiritual thing a person can do. In a world that teaches you to speak your mind, defend your name, and prove your point, heaven teaches something different. There is a sacred stillness that comes from trusting God more than your own voice. Silence is not always about the absence of words. It is about the presence of restraint. When you stay silent in the face of accusation, insult, or confusion, it tells heaven that your trust is in the one who sees all and judges righteously. That kind of silence shakes the enemy because it shows that your peace cannot be stolen. The enemy wants a reaction. He wants to pull you into a conversation where you defend yourself, explain yourself, and exhaust yourself. But when you remain silent, you break his strategy. You don't give him the fuel he needs to keep the fire going. Jesus himself was silent before his accusers. He had every right to speak. He had every reason to correct, explain, or even call down angels. But he stayed silent because he was submitted to a higher plan. His silence was not defeat. It was authority under control. That is the kind of silence that carries spiritual weight. It's the kind of silence that says, "I don't need to be understood. I just need to be obedient." When you learn to stay silent, you let God speak for you. You allow him to be your defense. You step out of the courtroom and let him be the judge, and God never loses a case. People may misjudge your silence. They may think you're weak, indifferent, or passive. But heaven knows what silence means. It means you're walking in maturity. It means you've chosen peace over pride. It means you're not reacting to flesh with flesh, but responding to the Spirit with stillness. Not every conversation deserves your energy. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every opinion needs a response. When you speak only when God tells you to speak, your words carry weight. But when you speak just to prove something, you end up draining your spirit. Silence trains you to listen. It creates space to hear God's voice clearly. In silence, your spirit becomes sensitive. You begin to discern what's worth engaging and what's worth ignoring. You learn that silence is a shield. It protects your heart from unnecessary warfare. It keeps your peace intact. It teaches your soul that God can do more with your quiet surrender than you could ever do with loud explanations. The mature believer knows that speaking is easy, but staying silent when everything in you wants to react. That takes spiritual discipline. That takes faith. And that opens the door for God to do what only He can do. There are seasons in life where you've done everything you know to do. You've prayed, fasted, obeyed, worshipped, and waited. But it still seems like nothing is moving. The temptation in that moment is to force your way forward, to make things happen in your own strength, or to defend yourself when you feel misunderstood. But God doesn't need your help to fulfill His promise. He needs your surrender. There is a moment where you must stop striving and simply trust. This doesn't mean you give up. It means you give over. You release the battle from your hands and place it in His. God moves most powerfully when we stop moving in our flesh. As long as we're trying to manipulate outcomes, fix situations, or convince others, we're still operating from a place of control. But God doesn't anoint control. He anoints surrender, and when He sees that you're done trying to make it work your way, He steps in and does it His way, or better than you ever could. Some of the greatest breakthroughs come not after intense action, but after quiet submission. It is in those moments where you fall on your face and say, "Lord, I can't do this anymore, but you can," that things begin to shift. Heaven responds to that kind of posture. It's not your performance that moves God, it's your position. A heart that is surrendered says more than a mouth full of declarations. You can speak victory all day long, but if your heart is still wrestling for control, there's no space for God to fully move. He waits for you to come to the end of your striving so He can begin His supernatural work. That's why the Word says the battle is not yours but God's. That's not just poetic, it's practical. When you truly believe that, you stop wearing yourself out trying to fix what only He can heal. There is a deep peace that comes when you let go. It doesn't mean the problem vanishes instantly, but it means the weight of the outcome is no longer on your shoulders. You stop asking, "What else can I do?" and start saying, "God, what do you want to do?" That shift in thinking is powerful. It aligns your spirit with heaven's rhythm. It makes room for divine timing and opens your life to divine surprises. You stop forcing things to fit and begin watching things fall into place. The favor of God will do more in a moment than your effort can do in a lifetime. You don't need to push open doors that God hasn't unlocked yet. You don't need to chase what's already in His hand. When you release it, He takes over. When you surrender, He advances. When you step back, He steps in. God doesn't need a co-pilot. He needs full control. And when you give it to Him, you'll find that He's been waiting, ready, and able to do what you couldn't do with all your effort. That's where real power begins. The enemy thrives in chaos. He feeds on confusion, drama, arguments, and emotional noise. He crafts situations to provoke your flesh because he knows that as long as you're reacting out of emotion, you're not walking in the Spirit. But when you learn the discipline of silence and focus, you shut the door to his influence. Peace frustrates the enemy. Stillness confuses him. When he launches an attack and finds you unbothered, unmoved, and rooted in the presence of God, his strategy begins to fall apart. The enemy wants you loud, impulsive, and offended. He wants you to lash out, to prove yourself, to chase after distractions that keep you from hearing what God is saying. But peace is your weapon. Silence is your shield. When your heart is quiet before God, the enemy loses his grip. He cannot function in an atmosphere where the Spirit is ruling. He loses access when you stop feeding fear and start cultivating peace. The enemy sends noise to drown out the whisper of God. He tries to stir up offense in your relationships, noise in your mind, and anxiety in your emotions, because he knows that if you ever get still enough, you'll hear truth, and that truth will set you free. That truth will expose every lie he planted. That's why the discipline of stillness is so powerful. It's not just about external quiet, it's about internal quiet. When your heart is anchored in God, it refuses to be tossed by every wave. You begin to live from a place of spiritual authority, not emotional reaction. You stop giving the enemy free access to your peace. Every time you respond in anger, bitterness, or fear, you hand him a piece of your spiritual ground. But when you respond with silence, worship, and stillness, you take that ground back. There is a dimension of spiritual power that can only be accessed through peace. It's in that stillness that God reveals strategy. It's in the silence that he gives instructions, and that's exactly what the enemy wants to prevent. He wants to keep you so distracted that you never tap into what God is really saying. He wants you busy defending yourself so you never realize that God has already gone ahead of you. But peace is not passive. Peace is active resistance to the chaos of hell. Every time you choose to worship instead of argue, every time you choose to pray instead of panic, every time you sit in the quiet presence of God instead of running to fix things on your own, you are waging war. The enemy hates that kind of power because he can't counterfeit it. He can imitate loudness, fake miracles, stir up emotions, but he cannot fake the fruit of the Spirit. He cannot imitate true peace. So when you walk in it, when you dwell in it, when you guard it like a treasure, you're walking in a realm of victory that hell cannot touch. Peace makes you untouchable, and silence keeps you hidden under the shadow of the Almighty. Spiritual maturity is not proven by how loudly you can pray, how often you preach, or how many scriptures you can quote. It is proven in how well you can stay still, humble, and restrained in moments when your flesh wants to do the opposite. One of the clearest signs of maturity is not in action but in control. It's easy to react when someone offends you, when plans fall apart, or when delays keep pressing on your patience. The natural man wants to speak up, fight back, prove a point, or push ahead. But the mature believer knows when to hold back, when to keep quiet, and when to wait for God to move. That kind of restraint is not weakness. It's the fruit of a heart that's been trained by the Spirit. It shows that your confidence isn't in your own strength or wisdom, but in the one who knows all things, sees all things, and works all things together for your good. There is a difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is driven by emotion, by ego, by flesh. But response, real response, comes from a place of discernment, timing, and spiritual awareness. Maturity is learning that just because you can say something doesn't mean you should. Just because you see something doesn't mean you need to expose it. Just because you have a solution doesn't mean it's time to release it. It takes discipline to pause. It takes growth to step back. It takes trust to believe that God can handle what you've handed to him. And it takes faith to know that his timing is better than your urgency. The spiritually immature always want to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. The spiritually mature are content to be hidden, quiet, and unseen if it means God is glorified and peace is preserved. Restraint is also protection. When you withhold your reaction, you keep the enemy from using your words against you. You leave no open door for confusion or division. You protect your witness, your testimony, and your spiritual authority. You remain in alignment with the Spirit rather than being pulled into the chaos of the flesh. Spiritual maturity doesn't chase every opportunity to speak. It waits for divine moments. It doesn't move with every emotional wave. It moves with the leading of the Spirit. When you grow in God, you become slower to speak and quicker to listen. You become less concerned with being right and more focused on being righteous. That is the kind of maturity that builds strength in silence, finds power in humility, and lives from a place of quiet confidence in the sovereignty of God. You don't have to prove who you are when you know whose you are. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to be loud to be effective. The most powerful people in the kingdom are not the noisiest. They're the most surrendered. They walk with God in such a way that their stillness speaks louder than words, and their restraint carries more weight than argument. When life becomes loud, and your heart feels pulled in every direction, remember the call is not to fight harder, but to focus deeper. Focus on God, because He is your anchor in the storm and your guide through the unknown. Humble yourself, not as an act of weakness, but as a declaration of trust, because God lifts the lowly and gives grace to the surrendered. Stay silent when the enemy tempts you to react, because stillness is not silence in defeat, but the sound of spiritual authority. Let your peace speak louder than your words. Let your restraint testify of your maturity. God does His greatest work in quiet hearts, in hidden moments, and through those who trust Him enough to stand back and let Him lead. This journey is not about how loud you are, but how yielded you are. It's in the quiet trust, the humbled heart, and the fixed gaze that God moves with power. May the Lord bless you with unwavering focus, deep humility, and divine peace that silences every storm. Stay rooted in His presence and let your life reflect His wisdom and strength. Thank you for listening. Keep walking in faith, keep growing in grace, and never forget that God's best work is often done in stillness. Good luck on your journey, and God bless you richly.